The small aqueduct entrance building interior was nothing more than a shelter for a wide stairway leading down, the stairwell quite long, at least 50 feet, the extent to which we could see. The air was decidedly colder here, but we didn't see anything that represented any sort of threat, so we began the climb down. As we made our way down, it didn't take long before we started to notice a strange, milky white covering on everything. About halfway down the stairway, every surface appeared to contain the covering, and we couldn't help but step on it as we continued our descent. Any idea what this is? Kartha asked, unsure at first whether the crystal-like material was safe to even walk on. It does not seem organic, Redfern responded, probing at the material as well. It's like some sort of crystallizing process occurred here, not exactly sure. The stairway led to a large, spectacular underground bridge, expertly hewn from the surrounding rock and spanning some sort of deep cavern or crevice below. The bridge was oriented from north to south, each direction well illuminated by more torches on the walls and offering 2 ways to continue our exploration. These dwarves sure know how to work stone, Eswin commented, impressed by the sight before all of us. Searching the bridge, we didn't notice anything out of the ordinary, as Eswin had just observed. The stonework here was remarkable, but we didn't notice anything further upon the bridge. There is nothing down there, Ariana commented, pointing into the crevice below. I would have expected an entire aquifer or underground river down below. While it was hard to say for sure, Ariana seemed correct, given the angles and shape of the crevice below. I suspected that it once bore an entire underground river, a massive flow of water that necessitated this bridge. However, the area appeared quite dry below, filled with the same milky white rock we were now growing accustomed to. Marching north away from the entrance stairway and bridge, we entered what appeared to be a small but ornate palace chamber, a dozen tall stone columns and statues surrounding a throne fit for a king within the center of the room. However, every surface here appeared to be covered in a stony white material, a sort of crystallization that made the entire chamber look as if a sudden ice storm had swept through it. The strange glassy stuff is here as well, Eswin was the first to comment, leading our heroes forward. In its day, the chamber was likely quite the location, a place where the current dwarven king above could come to sit, make decisions and generally rule while his fellow dwarves worked the aqueduct. While the palace room's surfaces were caked with the white crystal substance, I could still tell that the chamber was once both regal and impressive, highlighting what the dwarves here in blue were able to accomplish over the centuries. Reaching the throne in the center of the room, I could see that the western wall was open, a hallway leading away further to the west and shrouded in glassy darkness. Standing there looking about, we were quite surprised when one of the nearby dwarven statues started to move, turning its head in our direction. Several more statues began to move, gripping their spears in an offensive fashion and about to attack. Taking refuge alongside the crystallized throne in the center of the chamber, we formed a defensive circle as the stone statues dragged their way forward, attacking with cold, glassy, unblinking eyes. Defending ourselves, we quickly learned that the stone-like substance of the crystal statues could not be easily cut, those of us deploying edged weapons only able to do half damage against the monsters. But blunt weapons like maces, hammers and quarterstaffs were effective, and soon my heroes had dispatched the soulless beings, breaking all but one into pieces, their remains scattered across the crystallized floor. One of the defeated statues continued to stir, however, not quite destroyed. As Eswin lifted his weapon to crush the monster completely, Kartha put out her hand to stop, instead pointing toward the creature on the floor. Wait. Look. Better examining the statue, we could now see that small parts of its surface weren't quite crystallized, they seemed to be flesh. Kartha bent down and rubbed one of the fleshy areas, exposing even more flesh. The statue seemed partially mortal. Can you hear us? Kartha tried, speaking directly to the ruined statue on the floor. A few moments went by, each of my heroes looking at one another in awkward confusion. Then, the statue began to move a little, its life force apparently not completely spent. Lo, Lord Hefralin, the statue strained to whisper, its face just fleshy enough to speak. My lord, is that you? One of the eyes of the statue then barely opened, as if the statue were coming to life. Your Lord Hefralin isn't here, Eswin replied, unsure of what, exactly, to say. What can you tell us? The superior arms and armor required by the Sislans, the statue continued, as if the dwarven soldier were still alive. The infusion of magic was rushed, there was an explosion, everything destroyed. An explosion? Redfern asked, bending down closer to the still sentient statue. What more can you tell us? The human Huelsman. Dilt went too far, his magic was ill, tainted, everything destroyed, everyone killed. Supreme Healer Priest Dilt, Sainairs whispered, his religious superior here in the Cyan Desert apparently being implicated as having caused everything to be crystallized down here within the aqueduct. What has he done here in blue? Something unbecoming of a Huelsman leader it appears, Kartha replied, disappointed but not surprised. Everyone killed. I am dead? The animated statue continued, apparently recognizing its own incredibly sorry state. I am dead? Kneeling beside the statue, Redfern brushed away some of the stone surrounding the dwarf's left hand, exposing enough flesh to gently take his hand. Dwarven soldier, what can we do? Darkness, all hope, gone, this is undeath. Please, please. Destroy me. End this cursed existence. Having been transformed into something quite sad and unnatural, Eswin placed all his strength into a single massive blow, knocking the head of the statue clean off its shoulders and instantly destroying the statue thing. Surprised by the blow, I acknowledged that the deed needed to be done and several of the party thanked Eswin for acting so quickly. Now we know that Dilt is at least partially responsible for everything, Redfern stated, gaining his feet. But the word of an undead guard won't be enough, we need to find proof of his wrongdoing. My heroes agreed, heartbroken over what we had just witnessed here. Traveling west from the palace room and then using the hallway's southern door, we stepped into a smaller chamber that seemed filled with all kinds of stuff. There were likely dozens of separate objects here, most of which were lining shelves, attached to the walls or lying haphazardly on the floor. Not surprisingly, everything was coated in the same white crystal, likely ruining anything that may have once been valuable here. These dwarves sure like their possessions. Eswin commented, not interested in giving the chamber a thorough search. Let's just go. Deciding to search the area first anyway, we appeared to have discovered some sort of museum, the various artifacts and objects dedicated to the dwarven clan here in blue. There were all kinds of weapons, suits of armor and shields here, along with dozens of other heirlooms and artifacts that, to the dwarves, likely meant quite a bit. Unfortunately, all of it had been destroyed, the white crystallization coating everything. Continuing our search, we found what appeared to be some very old maps tucked away within some cabinets, likely centuries old. The maps detailed the underground aqueduct, showing a massive aquifer from the mountains to the west draining incredible amounts of water to a tunnel south of where we were standing. This aquifer, improved and stabilized by some tremendous dwarven engineering centuries ago, was the source of the famed Tears of Blue and, before the aquifer was petrified, capable of delivering all the water the city of Blue could ever need. While the information was interesting, it didn't help with our current quest in any way, and so we put the documents back and continued on our way. Trying the chamber to the north of the western hallway we had returned to, the door's locking mechanism had been crystallized and shattered after giving the door a strong push. Inside, we found a small room containing shelves on every wall along with a few tall cabinets and a variety of tables, dozens of boxes resting atop the shelves as well as the tables. Like everywhere else within the aqueduct, everything here was coated with the same white stony glaze and hardened into solid stone. First breaking through the white crystallization covering several of the boxes, we found a wide assortment of documents within, paper records written in the dwarven language and carefully arranged in some sort of specific order. Searching a few more boxes, each containing additional records, we assumed the room was dedicated to the long-term storage of documents relevant to the dwarves here in blue. However, reviewing all the documents here would have taken days, perhaps even weeks, time we certainly didn't have. Hence, we decided to leave the documents alone. Cracking open several of the cabinets, we then discovered yet more record-containing boxes, not even worth our time to open. In the corner cabinet, however, we spotted a large stone key hanging from a hook in the back wall. The key was quite decorative and sturdy, as if it couldn't be broken even if intended. I wonder what that opens, Ariana inquired, naturally curious. We should take it. Agreeing with Ariana, I grabbed the stone key and secured it away into my backpack before leaving the otherwise mundane chamber. Approaching a closed iron door at the far western end of the hallway, Ariana interpreted the dwarven words workers' crypt etched into the lintel surrounding the door. The locking mechanism within the door appeared broken, so we were free to open it and step into the crypt if we wished. A crypt, here in the aqueduct? Eswin asked, rather surprised. It was probably easier to inter those who died down here in this place, Sainairs responded, looking about. Perhaps we should leave the dead in peace. Foregoing the advice of sane ears, I asked Eswin to open the door, the heavy stone gate requiring much of the fighter's great strength to move. Eswin then led the party into the darkness of the tomb beyond. Inside, we found a small labyrinth of tunnels, the walls of each bearing small bronze plaques that marked the final resting place of a deceased dwarf. However, the white crystallization covered everything even in here, so it was impossible to read any of the metallic markers. While not willing to admit it, most of my heroes were quite uncomfortable within this place, and they certainly didn't want to search the twisty chamber. Despite the party's general reluctance to stay within the crypt, I ordered them to search it anyway to see what we might find. The crystalline material covering everything was fairly uniform here, and after a half hour or so we concluded that there was likely nothing in this place to actually find. Reaching the far western edge of the crypt and about to turn around, we then sensed a darkness behind us, contrasting with the whitish substrate over everything. Moments later, at least a half dozen more shadowy beings congregated in the tunnel leading out, preventing escape. Wraiths. Kartha warned, frightened for all of us. And there is a lot of them. Watching the monsters hover in the air about 20 feet away, they didn't seem wanting to attack. Trying a hunch, I then spoke to the ghostly beings, telling them that we didn't want any conflict. Equally surprising, one of the creatures responded in a chilling, raspy voice. Petrification magic awakened us, undo the magic, and let us return to our eternal rest. Still not attacking, the wraiths appeared to only want the magic that had awakened them to be dispelled. Recalling the scroll of dispel magic that the scribe up above in blue had given Redfern, the magic user quickly retrieved the scroll and read it, invoking its anti-magic properties and dispelling all magic within a 30-foot wide or so circumference. Immediately, the magic that had awakened the wraiths was drained away, causing the creatures themselves to fade away as well. As the last faded away, a disembodied voice whispered a final message. "We sleep now. In gratitude, we leave you with our final earthly treasures." The crypt then went quiet, my heroes looking around to ensure we were safe. A moment later, a secret panel in the far western wall slid down, revealing a small treasure trove. Not only were we free to leave the crypt unharmed, but we would do so with some loot as well. Escaping the workers' crypt and having gone as far west as we could, we returned east back to the palace chamber before heading south again and back to the bridge. The northern exit now fully explored, it was time to travel south and see where that would take us. We soon entered what appeared to be some sort of gallery, dozens of large paintings hanging along both walls here for perhaps 100 feet or so. The strange milky white stone that covered and permeated the floor, walls, and ceiling throughout the aqueduct we had explored so far covered the paintings as well, making them very hard to review. Hence, searching the area here was likely to take a fair amount of time. Splitting up, we carefully reviewed the individual paintings here in the hallway, often needing to wipe and even chisel some of the milky white substance off the depictions to better see what was underneath. From what we could deduce, there was a history here of dozens of important dwarves, all depicted doing something of importance, or at least sitting in their throne looking regal. My sense was that the hallway here was meant to impress visitors as they passed through. There was more to the series of paintings, however. A variety of images depicted scenes of the dwarves doing something down here in the aqueduct, creating, manufacturing or otherwise working with something. I couldn't tell what, exactly, was being worked, but it almost seemed like the dwarves carried on some sort of commercial enterprise down here. What was that? Ariana suddenly shouted, pointing toward the south. Standing still, we listened for additional sound. For a moment we didn't hear anything, but then we heard something being knocked over to the south. Entering this large reception hall from the north, we spotted tables, chairs, bookshelves, and all the furnishings to welcome newcomers to the living quarters section of the aqueduct down here. However, the same milky white substance coated everything here as well, from the massive silk banners above to the stone dwarven statues that lined the chamber every 10 feet or so. Strangely enough, several more of those dwarven statues appeared to be seated at the tables within the hall, while a few were up and about, almost as if they had been carved as walking from table to table. The scene was rather odd and I suspected that there was more going on here than what we could initially see. Giving the order to search the area, several of the dwarven statues suddenly turned in our direction and began to step toward us, just as they had within the palace chamber to the north. They weren't very fast and they creaked as they walked, but they definitely appeared threatening as they approached. It looked like we would need to defend ourselves again. Assaulted by half a dozen of the stone monsters, we again bashed the animated statues into pieces, the remains of the strange creatures spilling across the cold reception hall floor. Continuing to be wary, we searched the remains of the monsters we had just faced as well as the room itself. Little within the chamber was of interest, but the crystalline shards now on the floor piqued our interest. These creatures are similar to the ones we just fought in that palace chamber to the north, Huelsman commented, recalling our battle there. Yes, Redfern added, carefully examining the remains. If you look closely, it appears these statues were once living dwarves as well. At once, the rest of the party bent down to more carefully examine the shards of crystal strewn across the floor. At first it all looked like glassy rubble, but as we further inspected the remains, it became clear that they contained bits of bone, flesh, organs, and whatnot. Somehow, the statues we had just fought were once living, breathing dwarves who had somehow been converted into crystallized monsters. If I wasn't mistaken, it seemed that whatever crystallized the dungeon here also crystallized these hapless dwarves, and turned them into living statues. For Sisla. A voice from the shadows to the south suddenly called out. All at once, 6 human men appeared from the hallway to the south, leaping toward us. These men were all bearing plate armor, shields and maces that appeared gleaming and perfect in every way, impressive arms and armor we didn't expect. As the men attacked, another stood back, already beginning some sort of cleric spell. Defending ourselves as best we could, the combat was brief but intense, the clerics fighting as if we were some sort of religious enemy. While all but one of them were relatively low level and hence not powerful in terms of magic, they were well trained in melee combat and it took everything we had to defeat them. Paladins of Sisla, retreat! The squad leader finally shouted, barking his orders like a military commander. The clerics not as defeated as they seemed, all of them scampered away to the north, soon out of sight and leaving us angry and shaken there in the cold. Who the hell are the paladins of Sisla? Huelsman barked, turning to Sainairs for answers. I've never heard of such a thing, Sainairs responded, just as surprised as Huelsman. The Sislan way has never had need of any holy warriors as far as I know. And their armor and weapons, did you notice their unnatural glow? Kartha added, quite concerned. Their equipment appeared to be made of the same crystalline substance that permeates the aqueduct here, Redfern answered, as observant as Kartha. I would like to know why they attacked us, Ariana added. Why would Sislans do that? It must have been a case of mistaken identity, Sainairs answered, convinced that his Sislan brethren would not attack if they knew better. Then it appears we have Sislan fanatics as well as crystallized monsters to be wary of, Huelsman warned. Stay vigilant, who knows what else is waiting down here to attack. Continuing the hallway south, we entered a large but typical dining hall, dozens of long wooden tables, chairs, and all the furnishings to feed and entertain several dozen dwarves strewn about. However, the same milky white substance we had seen elsewhere within the aqueduct coated everything here as well. There was another dozen or so dwarven statues in here, many of which didn't appear typical, rather, the statues seemed to represent the demi-humans in various poses spending time within the dining hall. Searching the dining hall, we soon found evidence that perhaps a dozen or so of the living statues, those that were once actual dwarves who were somehow crystallized into a brittle stone found back in the reception hall to the north were here as well, and had already been attacked and destroyed. Perhaps it was the Sislan clerics we had just battled, or perhaps it was a yet-to-be-identified group of combatants. Either way, it appeared that at least we wouldn't have to fight them as well. Standing there looking about, and having passed through the bridge, hall of paintings and reception hall as well as this dining hall, it appeared that the milky white stony material covering everything was getting thicker and more pronounced. Hence, I suspected that whatever caused the covering, perhaps it originated somewhere close by and that we may be heading toward it. Exiting the dining hall to the south, additional tunnels led away to the west and east. Taking the eastern passage, we quickly found a fairly large chamber to the north, filled to the brim with crates and boxes, all of which were covered by the same white crystal we had now grown accustomed to. Naturally, we would need to do a thorough search of the room if we wanted to discover what was inside all the crates and boxes. Starting our search of the chamber, it didn't take long before we heard noises coming from the back corner. Creeping forward carefully, we came across half a dozen or so of the crystallized dwarves here that had torn into several of the crates. The supply room appeared to have once been filled with food and water, and now the transformed dwarves were trying desperately to consume something they could never again taste or drink. The sight of the crystallized dwarves was quite sad, but they then noticed our party and leaped forward, dropping the stone-like rations in preference of our living flesh. Now experienced in how to defeat the monsters, we quickly put them down, their remains scattering across the floor as so much shattered rock and debris. The poor souls were just trying to feed themselves, Cartha began, sad to have needed to cull the transformed dwarves. Yes, trying to satisfy an impossible hunger. Redfern added. We did them a favor. It appears the food and water here are all destroyed, Eswin suggested, examining the opened crates the dwarves had just broken into. This supply room could have fed everyone down here for a year, and it's all ruined. My fellow heroes nodded in agreement, the chamber a general waste of time. Trying the door opposite the supply room entrance to the south, we entered a smaller chamber, a sort of office perhaps meant to hold just 1 or 2 people at a time. Like everywhere else, the area was enveloped in a white sheet of crystal, the sight eerie to behold. From our vantage point, I could see a short hallway leading further south, heavy metal doors affixed to both sides every 5 feet or so. It didn't take long for us to recognize that the area here was a small, secure jailhouse, the southern corridor leading directly to 6 tiny holding cells. It was also not difficult to notice that the dust and debris on the floor had been recently disturbed. The area looked empty now, but someone, or, perhaps, a small group of humanoids had been here recently. Is someone there? A soft, mumbled voice called out from one of the closed cell doors. Unsure of what to think, I called out to the imprisoned soul beyond, asking what he wanted. The response was quick but heartbreaking. Yes. PL please. I am near death, help me. With Eswin's help, we then pushed the heavy door into the cell and looked inside. Lying there strapped to a blood-stained table was an almost naked and heavily wounded human man. Ordinarily, I would have wanted to ask a few questions first before potentially releasing someone I didn't know, but it was clear the man here was on the verge of death and our entire party rushed to his aid, freeing his bonds, sitting him up and bandaging him as best we could. As Ariana and Cartha provided some much-needed water, Sainairs stepped over to gauge the extent of the man's injuries and provide treatment. As he did so, however, the tortured human backed away and cowered, interacting with Sainairs as if the priest were his assailant. No, I won't do it. Go away. Easy, my friend, Sainairs returned, slowing his actions to demonstrate that he was not here to hurt anyone. Let us help. The injured man slowly let down his guard and allowed Sainairs to examine his wounds. The prisoner continued to tremble, but Sainairs was calming and gentle and the human began to show signs of trust. Moments passed in silence. With Cartha's help, Sainairs did a near-flawless job in bandaging the wounds of the human, stabilizing him and providing comfort. The man slowly stood, then turned to Sainairs and patted his chest twice before revealing his palm, the sacred sign of Sisla. Surprised, Sainairs returned the gesture. You're a Sislan priest? Sainairs said with quiet surprise. What happened to you in here? I am Brother Rents, the tortured priest returned, bowing slightly in a further sign of respect. I was recently recruited to become something I thought at first would be wondrous. However, I soon learned it was all a horrific lie. Go on, Redfern encouraged, all of us now quite interested in the wounded cleric's story. With the greatest of secrecy, several hundred priests of Sisla had been recruited over the past year to form what they're calling the Paladins of Sisla. I was one of them, and at first, I felt truly blessed by Sisla herself to have become part of something so grand. We've met these paladins, Eswin ridiculed, recalling your encounter back within the Dwarven reception hall earlier. They tried to kill us but we were able to chase them away. Was there a brother Sen leading them? Rents inquired, quite serious. He never said who he was, Ariana responded. But he was rude and arrogant, and saw us as a threat to be destroyed. That's him, the wounded Sislan returned. Well done with chasing him away. Rents then turned directly to Sainairs, his tone most dire. There is a war coming, a civil war within the Sislan way that will soon pit Sislan against Sislan. These new paladins don't just see enemies outside our institution but within it as well, and they're preparing to take down anyone who gets in their way. I fear the whole of the Sislan way is about to become militant and to try and stop them will result in. The prisoner referred to himself, the victim of recent torture and suffering. When I finally realized what the paladins were truly about, me and several like-minded priests tried to put a stop to them, Rents continued, looking away as he replayed the recent events in his mind. Once they recognized we would not embrace this new militant viewpoint, they tortured us down here, demanding that we repent and join them again. Had your party not come along when it did, I am sure they would have soon taken my life. This priest Renz had been through hell recently and I felt extremely sorry for him, asking how we could ease his pain. My physical scars will heal, the cleric responded with a heavy sigh. But what to do regarding the Huelsman way and my place within it, that's something I need to contemplate on my own. What will you do now? Ariana asked with genuine compassion. You're welcome to join us, Sainairs added. Renz gently smiled, his gratitude for all we had done for him obvious. No, I have my own path to follow. I have trusted friends here in Blue, they will help me heal, then escape this dwarven stronghold so I can tell the right people about the paladins and this coming civil war. Go about your own business. I am sure you're here for a reason. The cleric gave the sign of Sisla to Sainairs again, nodded to all of us and began to step away, a man seemingly on his own mission. He then happened to almost walk into Kartha, who had been hanging back throughout the conversation, not wanting to be involved. The Huelsman priest looked her over for a moment, then grinned and responded. A mutin. In times past, I would have ridiculed you here on the spot and even verbally assaulted you, just because of your atheism. Now, I wonder if you've been right all along. Shocked, all Kartha could do was watch as Renz bowed to her, then exited through the cell doorway, quickly out of sight. That was unexpected. Eswin commented, still staring at the open doorway before turning to Sainairs. It appears you Huelslans might not have everything as figured out as you preach. Civil war. Sainairs replied, still shocked by the conversation. Why would it come to that? We all want the same thing, to spread the word of Sisla and help make our world a better place. Only better for those who believe the same as you, Kartha interjected, trying not to mock Sainairs too much. And there will always be those who need to not just champion those beliefs but force them on others. Your faith isn't making the world a better place, just the opposite, actually. The two priests stared at one another for several awkward moments, prompting me to think about the encounter as well. Recognizing some wisdom in Kartha's words, I then agreed with her, suggesting that while having an opinion is fine and even being faithful to the hope of things working out is acceptable, blind faith, especially the kind that causes rivalry and conflict, only serves those with darker and more selfish desires, such as with the paladins of Sisla. Faith alone just wasn't an answer. Continuing down the hallway leading east, we soon found what must have been a barracks at one time, enough beds, cabinets, and footlockers here to have housed several dozen dwarves. Once again, everything was covered in the white crystalline substance. The barracks was large and it took quite a while to search it. However, we didn't initially find anything of interest or value. Whatever happened to the aqueduct down here to crystallized everything, it didn't appear to have occurred while any dwarves were here at the time. As we searched the far northeastern corner of the barracks, however, we came across something quite peculiar, a large leather tarp that appeared to be covering a heap of something underneath. Watching the tarp for a minute or so, we didn't notice any movement, so it didn't appear there was something underneath the tarp waiting to attack. Pulling the tarp away, we were horrified to find at least half a dozen human corpses, all of them beaten, bloodied, and stripped down to their undergarments. The bodies had clearly been dragged here and piled into a small heap and I couldn't help but feel incredibly sorry for them. Oh, Sisla, Sainairs gasped, heartbroken at the sight. These are more Huelsman clerics, tortured just like Brother Renz. My poor brethren. The murdered priests here were muscular and likely soldiers or even adventurers. Whoever did this must have been quite powerful, and utterly ruthless. This is likely the work of that paladin leader Sen, Eswin speculated, upset as well. What sort of madman can do this to his own people? He deserves Gemcore for this. Sainairs barked, on the verge of tears. Please, cover the bodies again, I can't look at them anymore. A little surprised by the request, my party obliged, covering the executed clerics again. All of us hurt over the disturbing find. My own heart began to break as Sainairs shed a few tears over his lost brethren. The Huelsman could be hard-headed and even arrogant at times, but he was also passionate and I definitely felt his sense of loss. The slain priests hidden again under the tarp, Kartha surprised the party with a relevant if not painful question. What should we do with the bodies? They deserve ritual, we need to bury them. Expecting some sort of conflict from Sainairs, the Huelsman simply continued to gaze at the heap on the floor, softly nodding his head in agreement. There is no place to bury them down here, Eswin commented, turning to me. What should we do? Recognizing that the aqueduct here wasn't conducive to a burial, and needing to hurry along on our quest anyway, I asked my heroes to set fire to the tarp and incinerate the corpses, providing them at least a little dignity in death. The process took an additional hour, but all of us seemed a little more at peace. And that's a wrap of episode number 25, The Aqueduct of Blu. Expect additional episodes every few weeks as the story continues.